science, and I also think that there's a huge correlation between scientists and artists. And I'm not a big fan of stereotyping scientists or stereotyping artists. If I put my glasses down and leave them somewhere and somebody calls me a spacey artist, I don't think that is necessarily correct. I think there's artists of all different stripes. There's artists that are extremely well organized, and then there's artists that aren't. And I think that same holds true with all populations. So I just wanted to start off saying that because I think through the last 30 or 40 years, there has been a stereotypical definition of artists that I don't necessarily think holds true, particularly with the artists that I've met, and particularly with the scientists that I've met and know. So we're just going to, I think we answered all the same questions. We're interested in the same questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? How do things work? And what does it all mean? Big questions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm an oil painter. I also paint gouache, which is an opaque watercolor. But I'm going to go through a little bit about the history of oil painting. At one time, in the pre-Renaissance period, most of the paint was egg tempera, or it was based in another medium. And then during, Jan Ek's time, this is how you grind paints. This is what people would do. They ground paints to get oil paints. This is a picture of lapis lazuli, which is a very expensive, and this is what was made to make ultramarine blue. I'm just pointing that out to keep in mind for a future reference down the road on this slideshow. So Jan van Eyck, the wedding portrait of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife, which is in the National Gallery of London. Jan van Eyck is the person that's probably responsible for changing and inventing oil paint. This is one of the first and best examples of the new technique. The pigments were the same as those used by Italian painters. The drying agent, oil, has increased brilliance, translucence, and intensity of color as the pigments were suspended in a layer of oil that also trapped light. So he added this drying agent and he added a little oil to the paint, and that's why when you look at a painting by Jan van Eyck, and it probably is not doing it justice because you have a light on this, it's like a jewel. It's an enamel. It almost has an enamel quality. And that's using that oil, that stand oil, that's in your medium, that traps and kind of gives luminosity to the oil. This is what I use, this process is what I use. I use stand oil, which is kind of a, linseed oil comes from stand oil. The stand oil is the original oil, and you use it in called a graduated medium. You start off with just a thin medium and maybe no stand oil. And as you go back into your painting, you increase the amount of stand oil that you put into your medium. And that is called graduating your medium. And by doing that, you have the effect of an enameled surface and a brilliance that comes through the painting. You cannot go in reverse. Some people call it thin to thick. You go in reverse and you put your half and half stand oil, half terpenoid, and then you go back down to a fourth stand oil and a 3/4 terpenoid mixture. Your painting will dull. It will dull the painting as opposed to making it more brilliant, and eventually it will crack. So there's a science behind that kind of pigment. So, very important painting for changing the nature of oil paint. So this kind of set off a whole 300 years of painting in oils. So when I was talking about lapis lazuli, this is a painting. That was such an expensive pigment to make, with the ultramarine blue, that it was only used for certain subjects in the painting. Christ, St. Peter. This is Christ giving this is Perugino. Christ giving the keys of Rome to St. Peter, which is indicative of that now St. Peter will be allowed to take people into heaven. not just Christ, but now by him giving the keys, St. Peter's will also be allowed to tell whoever is worthy that they're going to go to heaven. So, but you see that, and when we go up to the Impressionists, where you'll see a lot more blues being used because it gets cheaper. Right now, it's so expensive to make that blue that it's only used for certain, and you'll see like in the early Renaissance paintings, anything with the Virgin, Madonna, a lot of times her gown is in blue, and it's the lapis lazuli. So this is a portrait by Antonello di Messina, and he introduced a new technical improvement. He added lead oxide to the pigment of oil mixtures, and that also increased the drying time. So by increasing the drying time, the painter was able to go into the painting sooner and didn't have to wait so long, because there's this like happy little happy time when you put the first layer on, and if you go back into it too soon, you're going to take off that first layer. If you go back into it too late, it's completely dry and you're doing more of a glaze. But if you go into that happy layer, you can kind of work the paint up. So by introducing a little bit more of a drying agent, Messina was able to probably work the painting faster. And then Leonardo da Vinci improved the preparation and cooked the oily mixtures at low temperature and added beeswax to the mixture, about 5% to 10% of beeswax. And this prevented the color from getting too dark. And painters today, a lot of times, will put wax in their mediums. There's new mediums that have wax in them. They give a texture to the painting. A lot of painters today like the sense of texture. Whereas, Da Vinci, there's no texture in these paintings at all. You can hardly see the brushwork. It's just put on very delicately with like sable brushes and everything. But it introduced the beeswax into the painting medium. And then a few other painters. Giorgione, this is the Three Ages of Man. These are the Venetian painters. Titian, Man with a Glove. This is one of my favorite paintings by Titian. If you saw these paintings in life, the luminosity is just really beautiful. It just takes over. So those painters kept that technology in Italy for about 300 years. I mean, the mixture of those particular paints. So then I'm going to flip here and there, but Holbein and anamorphic perspective. And there's probably some scientists here. And graduated medium. I just spoke about the graduated medium. So this is a very famous painting called The Ambassadors. It's huge. It's at the National Gallery in London. Time I saw it there was a whole group of school children in front of the painting. They must have been no older than 7 years old. And they were enthralled for about 30 minutes while the man talked about this painting. So here is a skull. And it's painted in an anamorphic way, so that when you entered to the painting, either I think below right or from up here, and you saw it from the side, you saw the actual three-dimensional painting, this would become a regular skull. It's from your viewpoint that you're looking for it. So there's many reasons why maybe Holbein painted that. And it's so notable in the painting. One possibility is the painting represents three levels: the heavens, as portrayed by the astrolabe and other objects on the shelf; the living world, as evidenced by books and a musical instrument on the lower right here; and death, which is signified by the skull. It has also been hypothesized that the painting is meant to hang in a stairwell, so that persons walking up the stairs and passing the painting on their left would be startled by the appearance of the skull. And I just love that. A further possibility, to me this rings the most true, is that Holbein simply wished to show off his ability with the technique in order to secure future commissions. But it's a fantastic painting if you ever have the opportunity to travel to the National Gallery. It's really quite large. There's the skull, seen from the proper perspective if you were on the side or heading up to bed. Okay, so here we go. The French Impressionists. What happened to oil painting during the why did the Impressionists happen? Well, paints became tubed. And the breakthroughs of Monet, Pissarro, Renoir, and others would not have been possible if it hadn't been for a little-known American portrait painter named John Rand. Like many artists, Rand, a Charleston native living in London in 1841, struggled to keep his oil paints from drying out before he could use them. This is, people were grinding their own paints. At this time, the best paint storage was a pig's bladder. And he's holding two pig's bladders. And you would use a tack to get to the paint. But there was no way to completely plug the hole afterward, and bladders didn't travel well, frequently bursting open. So, he invented the paint tube. Made from tin and sealed with a screw cap, Rand's collapsible tube gave paint a long shelf life, didn't leak, and could be repeatedly opened and closed. This transformed painting. This allowed painters to go outside and do plein air painting, and that is why the Impressionists did what they did. They were able to get their tube paints and go out of the studio and have a number of paints that they could use in the landscape. So, and also, because they didn't have to grind their paints, they could take a lot more color. So there were new colors that were invented with the aid of science. Chrome yellow, emerald green, again, and so we would throw back to that lapis lazuli. A scientist came up with a synthetic paint called ultramarine that replaced the lapis lazuli, and so the Impressionists had that blue very affordable at their, in their toolkits. So it was huge. Renoir said, without colors and tubes, there would be no Cezanne, no Monet, no Pissarro, and no Impressionism. Big step. So you can see the predominance of blue in this Monet painting. And I also, because I'm going to talk a little bit how light falls on the landscape. So I'll do a little bit more of it later on, but I just want you to note in the water that there's brushwork. The brushwork is not tossed off or meaningless. It is put there with an understanding of the way light falls on the water and also perspective, how the marks in the front are much bigger and wider than the marks in the back as we're moving forward. They're the same, very much the same kind of ripples, but to get a sense of distance, we need them to come forward. And so it helps, and this is linear perspective, taking us back into the landscape. So I always really emphasize with my students, the study of the water and the study of the landscape and the anatomical quality of the landscape is really important for the success of your paintings and for capturing distance, so an understanding of that, because it's a lot to deal with, but once you understand how it goes back, it makes a little bit more sense. So here, another, lots of blues. And you can see the water is more active as it's closer to the figures, which holds true of a boat moving through water. All the blues. And here we go again, the science of how the gondola is reflected in the water. It's not just tossed off. It's from the light is throwing the shadow shade from the gondola. The water is more active in front. So, and you can see the light source by looking at the cast shadows. These are just examples of Monet paintings. All right, here's your basic color wheel. From this color wheel, and you can't distinguish the colors, but here's a basic palette. You know, a light yellow, a light orange or light red, a deep red. This is purple, but it's a blue, and you know, this is not my color palette. This would be another. This would be a bright blue, and this would be a deep blue. And from those colors, by understanding mixing of those colors, you can get pretty much any color that you want in the palette, right? So I thought I would show you this because you can see. Let's go back. Color wheel. Manet's Barre the Fines Bergère. I love this painting. That painted later on in his life. So how do you paint oranges and reds with two reds, with two blues and two reds? So you pick out your deep red, your alizarin crimson red. You put it down. To get to the oranges, you brighten it. You brighten it with your brighter red, and then you brighten it with your brighter yellow, and you're going to get the brighter orange, just from that combination. And it kind of, when you use those kind of colors, the painting has a tendency to sing. The gold. So you would use maybe yellow, dull it with a little blue, and add white into it, and you'll have a gold. So I could go on and on about this painting of where you would get these oranges into the hair. You would lighten all the different colors in here are basically from the same color wheel. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a discipline and it's a science of mixing paints. And by using that, a painting has a harmony that is very different from using 20 tubes of paint with each with a different color. It has a harmony in it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about light. Light doesn't just trickle down from the sky. Light is thrown. Light throws down, and you know, you see a light source, and this is why students study light that want to, are interested in painting the direction of light. So look, the light is hitting this sphere. It's cutting it off in half because here the sphere is turning away from the light. So it's dark, and right here on this other side, the light is coming in, bouncing down here, and coming back up in here a little bit, and that's called reflected light. So the understanding of light, and that light doesn't move over forms, it moves across forms, which is why you have this flashing effect. So light is thrown, and this would be so, and then since it's thrown, the shadow is tossed, right? Thrown and tossed. So we're looking at some examples of light. Vermeer. The light is thrown, hits the tops of things. As it moves away, it's darkening. Where, pretend that her face is the sphere, here's the cutoff, here's the cast shadow that's thrown. Tossed, thrown, tossed. I can't remember which way it went. Velasquez. Again, you can imagine here's the sphere. plane of the face, as it turns away from the light, goes into shadow shape. The head casts a shadow on the neck. Early Velasquez. Even the egg, that's a perfect sphere. The sphere is just where the light is hitting, and then it's coming back and getting lost. Here's a cast shadow. The knife is over the bowl. We know how that knife is sitting on the bowl because of the cast shadow. And we know how deep the bowl is because of the cast shadow. We know the shape of the bowl because of the cast shadow. So the cast shadow is something that has to be paid attention to too in painting. It can't be just tossed off, right? Everybody wants to toss it off, but can't be. So again, so that those are important to read that three-dimensional quality of the painting. Here, the highlight as it runs around the lip. It's hit and it's hit. A little harder here than hit, and this swings the top of the bowl around. It's not rendered necessarily all over, but it's hit and hit. And so by studying light and studying how it falls, which is a huge science, it takes many, many years of discipline to do that, you're able to create this sense of this kind of space. Sargent is an interior light, but still, it's light from down below, a theatrical light. But here, all the characters are tossing shadows. And that's what makes the drama of the painting. The light makes the drama of the painting. She's lit up, she's in front. These cast shadows, the hands against the wall, the drama of it all. He's leaning his head back, so his cast shadow is less because it's projecting his head back. So the cast shadow tells you a lot about the movement and what the person is doing. And it's kind of what gets you in the gut when you look at a painting. Hopper. Now here, Hopper's all about the cast shadows. Light hitting, light tossing, cast shadows thrown. There's nothing wimpy about it. It's all angles. It's just that strong light. Okay, so then we go to Seurat. A number of years later, after this invention of the paint tube, George Seurat began painting Sunday on La Grande Jatte. He was an art student at the Academy of Fine Arts in Paris. This painting is in the Art Institute of Chicago. It's quite large. But he studied the physics of color, and this enormous painting is an exercise in color theory. So probably a lot of you are familiar with Seurat, but he was a pointillism, a little bit right after the Expressionists. Each one of these is a very layered, one piece of paint dot next to another piece of painted dot. So when I showed you the color wheel, then you're talking about complementary colors working across the spectrum. Purple and a little bit of yellow is going to gray that purple down in the umbrella. Purple and yellow being complementary colors. You can't really see, these are probably some deep reds in here, green and red being complementary colors. So that when you come up close to the painting, it's a series of dots. When you pull but way back, you have this shimmering sense of the painting. I can get a little bit closer up. And it's almost, can you see the dots? You can see a little bit of them. But honestly, a painting like this, it has to be seen in the flesh to really get the quality of that. But again, he's also using cast shadows. Some see the poetry in my painting, Seurat said. I see anatomy of the landscape. This is going to be short, but I was talking about that water. Here's a Frederick Church painting painted on Mount Desert Island. A view of Mount Desert Island, right, Jack? I think so. So here, an understanding of these. I mean, these guys really studied the landscape. Now they worked more in the studio than the Impressionists did, but they're out there watching to see how waves really do crash on rocks. An understanding of it, how they crash, and the spray comes up. It's not just done carelessly, and how it rolls back to the surf. So waves have an anatomy. As they come forward, they come up, they hit the light, they roll over, they lose the light. Same thing in the light principle that we were talking before. They come up, the sun's shining, they're coming up at a angle, they're hitting the light, so a wave has a highlight and a light. They're coming back down, they're rolling under where the deepest part of the wave would be, and then they're flowing back out and catching light. So, to understand that as a painter helps you to render it, and also how it comes forward, and the marks that you make in the forward motion. And then at its back, these waves might be as large, probably not, but they're going back in space and perspective, so they're rendered smaller, of course. Again, wave patterns are even more of a night scene, but here as you come up, you crest the wave, catches the light, rolls back down. Next time you go out on a wavy to Seurat or something, you can see if I'm right. Just watch those waves as they roll over and catch the light, and then splash up. It's a watercolor by Winslow Homer, who really went out and studied the water, had a little shed made that you could roll around and put on cliffs so you could be in there painting. But here, the boat is up, and it's tossing the shadow. The shadow's indicative, telling you how raised up that boat is. It's so important. It's telling you the entire drama of the painting. If you can imagine the painting without that cast shadow, it would have no power. So the way the shadow is placed on the water is very important, and you have to have an understanding of science and water and how the anatomy of the landscape in order to do that. Atmospheric perspective, going back from here to, it's probably very, not sure, it's very loose, but there's more atmosphere before probably go back into space. Another Homer painting. This is a combination of both figures and an anatomy, but the cresting wave. These are all tools to help the painter and to frustrate the painter. So then there's also human anatomy, and that's going to be brief, but the study of, so here's a Bernini. This was in the Borghese Gallery in Rome. So Bernini, of course, Michelangelo had quite a handle on anatomy. Bernini was amazing handle on anatomy. A lot of sculptures in Rome are Bernini's. This is at the moment, it's Apollo, Daphne and Apollo. And Apollo is chasing Daphne, and as soon as he touches her, she turns into a laurel tree. So Bernini needed to know his anatomy so well that he could take those fingers and turn them right into the leaves of the tree. It is an exquisite, it is a incredible feeling to stand before this sculpture and see the beauty of it all the way around. Everything, as she's right, see where the knee is? She's just at that moment when she's turning into a laurel tree. And a little bit closer. There's nothing that's not paid attention to on the anatomy, what's in action, can see her deltoid here. You can see that the trapezius. You can see every quality. And that's makes a dynamic figure. And, I mean, who would take that on? I mean, but it's so beautiful. And so a lot of Berninis are like that. And now I'm going to go to another. Well, this is interesting. So this is a crucifix in San Spirito in Florence by Michelangelo, young Michelangelo, 17, I believe. The friars, it wasn't customary to do dissection, but the friars allowed Michelangelo to take some of the unnamed corpses from the county hospital and do dissection, and they gave him a room so that he could study anatomy. So as a gesture of thanks, Michelangelo carved the friars this beautiful cross, and it's hanging there now. So it's just about this big. I want you to take a close look at the anatomy. The figure is beautifully draped, right? You can see the abdominal cavity here. It's formed, but it has gravity. The figure is falling from the cross. It's so, and as you walk around it, it's so graceful. So 20 years ago, somebody found a cross. This is also very beautiful, and they attribute it to Michelangelo. But if you have a trained eye, and this is my perspective, this is not a Michelangelo. This could be somebody. There were many of these crosses carved at this time, but it is, and I would like you to make that judgment yourself by comparing the two. The sameness in the legs. Look at the abdominal cavity. I mean, there's things that are just really very, very beautiful about it, but it's not a Michelangelo. That's what I say. So the study of anatomy is just another science. And then, of course, Botticelli. La Primavera. It's one of the most, it's a group of women in a heaven-like meadow. But what's interesting is about all the horticulture that Botticelli put into it. And this is in the Uffizi Gallery. There's at least, according to official estimates, there are at least 500 individually identifiable plants on display, comprising nearly 200 species. Some have suggested they represent all the plants growing around 15th century Florence that flower between March and May, while others have claimed they include fantasy plants Botticelli might have made up especially for the painting. So, again, it's hard to get close to this painting. I don't know if anybody's been to the Uffizi in the last couple of years, but it is unbelievable. So the best way, this is my recommendation, if you can do it, is to get a guide to go in there, because then you can get up close to these paintings, and it's well worth it. So, conservation. Is anybody familiar with the unicorn tapestries at the cloister, the Met, and so this is quite a story. I don't know what time my time is. Plenty of time? So if you don't mind, I'm going to read something from the New Yorker, Capturing the Unicorn by Richard Preston. I think it's a really interesting story. I'll try to make it quick. So the tapestries. In 1998, the Cloisters, the Museum of Medieval Art in Upper Manhattan, began a renovation of the room where the 7 tapestries known as the Hunt for the Unicorn hung. The unicorn tapestries are considered by many to be the most beautiful tapestries in existence. They are also among the great works of art of any kind. In the tapestries, richly dressed noblemen, accompanied by hunters and hounds, pursue a unicorn through a forested landscapes. They find the animal, appear to kill it, and bring it back to a castle. In the last and most famous panel, the unicorn in captivity, the unicorn is shown bloody but alive, chained to a tree surrounded by a circular fence in a field of flowers. The tapestries are 12 feet tall and 14 feet wide. They were woven from threads of dyed wool and silk, some of them gilded or wrapped in silver around 1500, probably in Brussels or Liège, for an unknown person or persons and for an unknown reason, probably to honor a wedding. The tapestry's meaning is mysterious. The unicorn was a symbol of many things in the Middle Ages, including Christianity, immortality, wisdom, lovers, marriage. For centuries, the tapestries valuable. The tapestries were in France. In 1922, John D. Rockefeller bought them and gave them to the cloisters. Their monetary value is incalculable. So they decided that they needed to clean the tapestries. So they were rolled up and moved in an unmarked vehicle and under conditions of high security to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The cloisters is in the Bronx. It's like in a castle up in the Bronx. They ended up in, so if any scientists in the room, this sounds familiar. They ended up in a windowless room in the museum's textile department for cleaning and repair. The room has white walls and a white tile floor with a drain running along the side. It is exceedingly clean and looks like an operating room. It is known as the wet lab and is situated on a basement level below the museum's central entrance staircase. In the wet lab, a team of textile conservators unpacked the tapestries and spread them out face down on a large table one by one. At some point, the backs of the tapestries had been covered with linen. The backings, which protect the tapestries and help to support them when they hang on a wall, were turning brown and brittle and had to be replaced. Using tweezers and magnifying lenses, the team delicately removed the threads that held each backing in place. As the conservators lifted the backing away inch by inch, they felt a growing sense of awe. The backs were almost perfect mirrors of the fronts, but the colors were different. Compared with the fronts, they were unfaded, incredibly bright, rich and deep, more subtle and natural looking. The backs of the tapestries had, after all, been exposed to very little sunlight in 500 years, and I'm just going to keep switching to the tapestries. Nobody alive at the Met, it seems, had seen them this way. A tapestry is woven from lengths of colored thread called the welt, which are passed around long, straight, strong threads called the warp. The warp runs horizontally and provides a foundation for the delicate web, which runs vertically. Medieval tapestry weavers worked side by side in teams using using their tools. I think I skipped that part, but it doesn't really matter. So, it would take a team of maybe, and they were all young men working, and it would take them maybe a year to finish a tapestry. So then the tapestries were taken by the conservators at the Met, and they were put in wet baths and just lowered into, water was brought in, clear sanitized water was brought in, and the tapestries were soaked in there. And when the water was, the whole floor is like a bathtub, they can bring in the water. And that's why they have the drain on the side. So when they took the water out, the tapestry smelled like, like a wool sweater, like a sheep or something. So then they had, Philip de Montebello, who was the director of the Met at the time, insisted that the tapestries be photographed with high digital cameras, front and back. So a team of photographers came in, they built a scaffold, they put a camera on the scaffold on top, and they moved very slowly. They couldn't touch the tapestries, they were not allowed near the tapestries, but they moved slowly above and shot each piece of the tapestry in little squares, like little tiles they call them. I think they amassed like 200 CDs of information and numbers. I'm not a technical person. So the tapestries were all photographed digitally. Well, then what happened? They tried to put those digital photographs together, and they didn't match up. What had happened in the conservation process was the silk and the wool and the materials became alive, so that the little threads were like undulating, and some were drying at different rates than others. So when the photographers came in and tried to match those up, they couldn't connect the dots. So as so hot often happens in art and in science. The problem couldn't be solved. They put the CDs away. A few years later, one of the directors of the Met was at a dinner party, met a guy who was endowing a chair in science for two brothers that worked hand in glove together. These two brothers, the Shanovsky brothers, needed to be hired as one. They worked, that's how they worked together. So he was funding them, and they were at one point just adjunct teachers. So he funded them for a position, I think, at MIT. So they were discussing over dinner this issue with the tapestries. One of the brothers was there and said, well, come on down, we need to show you the photographs of at the Met. So he went down, and the woman that had been in charge of this project says, well, I have a problem for you. Gave him all of these CDs, and him and his brother had made a computer out of mail-ordered parts, and it was called IT, and they were going to put these digital images together and restore this whole tapestry. Well, it became quite an incredible job, but they figured it out, worked endless hours. At one time, he left all the CDs in the lettuce bin at the local grocery store. Went back and found them. So these two, just by happenstance, it went to these research scientists that were able to finally take those digital photographs, and with their knowledge, were able to put them together. So now there's a perfectly recorded image of the tapestries. That's long and short there. But I love that combination. And that does happen. Sometimes you're at a dinner party or you're just like, and something happens, you meet a connection that solves a problem for you. And the cloisters, it's really well worth seeing these in the flesh, because when you go up to them, you can see that silver and gold entwined in the fabric of the tapestries. This is another technology, X-ray technology, to see what's underneath the painting. You might be kind of familiar with this. So this was a Degas painting. It was put on the X-ray machine. See what was underneath it. There's the X-ray. And that was the painting underneath. This is not such a mystery to painters because you're always reusing canvases, but it's kind of interesting to see what is underneath a lot of these canvases, or how an artist chose to change their composition or alter it. I love this painting. So on closing, I'm going to just say I did my experience with some scientists. I want to show you two portraits, one of which is mine, but this other portrait is more of a great take. They're both, I don't have the information in front of me, but so this is a very famous genome expert, and I have his name in my files. I just don't want to leaf through them. And so this was his portrait. The artist painted his portrait this way, or compiled his portrait. His DNA material is somewhere in here. Some kind of material is in this like glass thing. So this is hanging at the National Portrait Gallery. This is that choice of a portrait. And then yeah. I'll go Chuck close. This is a photograph. I don't know if it's a painting. Chuck would have been painted by little digital things. So, and then I went down to Johns Hopkins University to meet Dr. Barton Childs, who was a leader in child genetics a number of years ago. And remember the 3 ages of man that we talked about before? So Barton at this time was 92. He had never wanted his portrait painted because he really was not a fan of the academic portrait. He was finally talked into it, and I was very fortunate to get the job. And I went and he met me at the door. He walked me to his office, and we were in his office about 2 or 3 hours, and nothing had changed in his office for about 40 years. But on the wall were pictures of all sorts of animals and mothers and children all over that he had tacked to the walls. He had 70 years of students, so there was a committee on painting his portrait. And this is Dr. Childs, I think in his late 60s. A lot of his students knew him then, right? They knew him in many years of his life, so these were all factors coming in on how do you paint Barton Childs. And I said, well, I kind of paint him how he is today. So that is how Dr. Childs was done. So
Just will describe the forward just for a second.
Yeah. And that'll be up for a while. So he had, so here's a younger, so I decided, okay, I'm gonna like try and keep everybody happy. I'm gonna put some of him as a younger man in the background. Well, this was one of his teachers. And then here's a baby bear and its mother. And here are 3 children he worked within the Henrietta Lacks Clinic. And I wanted him to come out strongly. So, and that's the end of my lecture. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you like the portrait?
Yeah, he did. We had a couple bottles of champagne. He was on oxygen. Yes.
Yeah, when I was at the museum, I saw a Van Gogh painting. They talked about the flowers that had faded. The colors weren't the way you painted. I guess maybe it was a yellow, but not white. So what's going on? If they're minerals that are ground up in oil, why should they fade?
Well, you know, where was it that you saw it?
Metropolitan Museum.
Yeah. You know, there's so many factors going on there. First of all, Van Gogh didn't have very much money. I'm not sure what kind of materials that he really used when he was painting. Although he had a lot of contemporaries like Pissarro and Gauguin that, you know, helped him with paints and everything. Then storage. You know, it could have been stored very improperly for many, many years. Could have been hidden under his brother's bed or wherever. I think his brother, you know, even. And so those are a lot of factors of where it was. Could have been sitting out in the hot sun for a long time.
What happened? Why does sunlight make the color fade?
Sunlight usually is really friendly to oil paintings. It wasn't a watercolor or anything, was it? It was an oil painting. Because usually sunlight does not hurt oil paintings too much, but it probably just bleached out whatever was in the pigment. That would be my guess. I mean, conservationists at these museums, they're really knowledgeable about all that. They have these things. So, yes.
You showed a picture earlier on that had very frugal use of blue, because I think you said it was like this lazuli, it was very expensive, and yet the sky above was a sea of blue. Why was that affordable, but the cloaks and things weren't?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I
Is it
mean,
a
maybe it was a different
pigment,
blue.
maybe? Could it have been a different, cheaper blue pigment?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that painting wasn't the best example, but if you look at a lot of the Virgin Marys and the Madonnas, they'll be like, they'll be pearl-like blue cloths.
Okay, thanks.
When you paint, do you use a small palette of colors or
Do I use a small palette of colors or a large palette of colors? I can tell you exactly what I use. I use lead white. And a lot of people don't want to use lead white. It's very minimal, the amount of lead in it, but remember when I told you that they added lead into the paint for the drying agent, and cad yellow light, cad red light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and maybe some sap green or raw umber and ivory black. That's pretty much it. But I experiment. But if I need to go out in the field, I can go out with 5 colors and be okay. 5 or 6. Yeah.
What was the name of the unicorn tapestry art?
We don't know. No, it was done in a factory. There's no, it was done by, a lot of these a lot of these, you know, there were huge factories that employed a lot of people, so there was no single artist. There probably was somebody that designed that, but we don't know who that is.
Often said you should varnish your paintings after a year. What happens and why do you do that?
See, I never varnish paintings. I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think if you graduate your mediums, you should not have to varnish your painting. If you look at some of the Holbeins, like in the Frick Museum, I don't believe they're varnished, right? So I think varnish is used to bring a luminous back to the painting, but if you graduate your medium, you should have that luminous, and also to protect your painting from like different things. But I think it just adds a different thing. Also, another way of graduating your medium is some people will use a little bit of varnish in right when they're painting it. So the varnish is kind of within the paint and gives it that quality. But varnish is a very tricky deal because it will yellow. It just depends on how the longevity of your painting. And that is the extent of my knowledge. There are people that are far more knowledgeable about varnishes than I will ever be. And there's a bunch of new varnishes on the market now. Gamlin is coming out with all these new products, you know. So there's a lot of things that are.
Does it protect your painting or
I have had oil paintings that are 20 years old that look like that. I don't think there's anything. Maybe if they were in a church with incense and candle wax or a lot of smoking or over a fireplace, maybe. And then you can wash and clean. You should be able to wipe oil painting with just a damp rag and it should come clean. Again, Bucky, I'm not really that knowledgeable about it.
Some people use varnish because it can be removed, so it's a way of, use the right solvents on it, it'll come off and leave the oil paint behind. So it makes it, some people think, it makes it easier to clean. And I think that's part of it, is that a lot of old paintings, they'll go in, they'll strip off the
Well, a
old
lot of them
varnish,
are so badly varnished, you
and
know.
then they'll
Yeah.
re-varnish it, so with the varnish comes all the dirt.
But you'll see, like, if you'll see a Ryder painting or something with a heavy varnish on it, it's all cracked, you know? So they're
If I
varnished.
could use scrubbing material, and
Yeah.
it seems the way it's painting literally breaks down.
Yeah,
These oils never set properly, so as they're hung, they kind of keep down.
well, that's happening today with modern art. I mean, like, people are throwing straw and all sorts of materials into their paint. And it's really challenging conservationists at museums because they're trying to pull off the
Okay, well,
wall.
like you said, there's all these new materials coming
Yeah.
out, who knows what the lifetime is? So question any artist has to consider is, do they see themselves as Michelangelo in a painting for the last 300, 400 years, or am I painting for my clients and when I'm dead? What happens to the painting? A lot of modern artists do that, they go, I had an art teacher at Montserrat, for that money. He didn't care what happens, somebody else is that's what conservationists are for. No, there's different views, different techniques, materials are.
I just like the look of it. I just like the look of a graduated painting and it's going out the door. Yeah.
And who knows what they have to do with colors, they haven't been around.
Well, exactly. And well, see, now they're making varnishes that you put on an oil paint that makes it all look like acrylic. I mean, I don't know why you would paint oils and then put a varnish on that turns your painting into like an acrylic, but anyway. So the question over here, sorry.
Oh, I was just, I got my question. It's not a science question, it's something you said about the unicorn tapestries. You said the man who made them, and not to be sexist, but working with weaving is traditionally a woman's job. Was it men back then?
Yeah. Yeah. They were the ones that went out to work, you know. They were employed. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
What was that question?
How long would it take to dry the tapestry?
Where is the tapestry now?
Okay, so it's in the cloisters in the Bronx.
Still in them.
I think the cloisters are northern Manhattan. Northern Manhattan is the cloisters, not the Bronx.
Oh, the cloisters is not in the Bronx?
No, it's
Oh,
very
sorry.
northern Manhattan.
I just assumed it was, anything north of 122.
It's known as the Heights.
It's the Heights,
The
okay,
Heights.
thank you for correcting me. Yeah. Yeah, upper Manhattan. Something's in the Bronx.
There's a lot of different sciences, but there was also a science of optics. And some of the artists would get projections of the light in a box and sketch that out to get the false, sort of perspective.
That's a whole other debate, yeah. I mean, the whole, David Hawkins' whole theory with, yeah.
So just to dovetail on that, I was a little bit curious how some of this is a science so much as opposed to just the incredible power of observation.
Exactly.
And how is it really a science? I mean, I can understand if you're graduating things and you have a study, and you see the study over 12, 12:30, 1, 1:30. But it seems so much of what you were showing here is just incredible observation.
Isn't that science?
That's science. That is science. That's
I'm just talking about the process of discovery.
Okay.
Process of discovery and then process of innovation. I think the process that the artist and the science, and that's the mind working. And
Absolutely, I was just curious
Yeah.
if you ever saw in this study of some of these works, if you saw them sort of throughout the afternoon.
I probably like something like Seurat really would do, like, he considered himself kind of a scientist.
You think of Seurat, he was the first digital painting.
Yeah.
Anything we look at digital art today, you could find in his.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that technique is not.
And I think some modern artists are really experimenting with science in a different way.
In the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, a great deal was learned about the physiology of vision, including the structure of reception on the retina. And there was a concept known as the visual receptive field, which had a structure, a center and a surround, on, very lawful structures. And I'm wondering whether that science ever had an impression in artistic work. I mean, naturally, it looks like a pointillistic type of retina.
Well, I'm sure, and on some level, it is, I don't know which particular who, but there's so many artists, and certainly, like I said again, there's different types. People that are interested, people that will sit down and read a scientific journal for 4 hours a day. I'm sure there are artists that are like that, and that came. I know some of them, so that would come across something like that. From an artist like myself's point of view, observation is the way to turn the mind. So by leading a person down the path of observing, eventually changes their visual thinking. And so you're getting to the same point, but through a different method. But they'll look at the world in a different way.
The artist takes a more phenomenological approach, but there seems to be a striking parallel between what art has been doing for a long time and what was discovered in the 50s, 60s, and 70s about the physiology of the eye.
Well, there's two things that come up that are interesting. One is how do you take a linear light spectrum, there's there was light, you put a prism on white light, you get purple, you get it's like you cut the color wheel at between red and purple, stretched it out, and the prism gives you that in a line, but not a circle.
Right, and I mean, there's two ways of, right.
How do you take that linear thing and turn it into a circle? And that it relates to what are how does I think it's the red reflective, how does it respond to, it responds to both purple and red. And that's the trick that turns that, makes the color wheel something that's physically not there. It hasn't worked.
Well, there's two ways of teaching this. The one just to telling somebody how it's going and you know, studying, and then there's the actual physical getting in and studying it and teaching it by example, by looking at, if you're outside looking at the light every day, you're gonna learn something.
To go back to the young lady's question about how does this become science, when we were studying perspective, it's math and linear science. How does this mathematics work to create this perspective, so this will go to a certain angle, and how many different points of perspective, and this you actually can, and a lot of the pre-Renaissance artists were sitting down and really drawing this all out with perspective and different kinds of rulers and things, so that's part of your how is it science.
I think it makes great teamwork. I think that should be the United Nations. All this, like even teaching in schools, in the middle schools and everything, to all this cross-disciplinary stuff is so enriching, and it's so valuable, because you can look at any painting and find science, math, English, literature, anything, any of those, in any painting. So you can take students down a different kind of a road to learning. So are there any more? Yeah.
Under painting, would you say that the Impressionists were the first large group of painters to eliminate